And welcome to the first Public Utilities and Sustainability Committee hearing of the year. We're excited to discuss potential code changes around pollinator gardens and utility reselling. I want to just pause to note, because when I stated this when I first was elected, that we wanted to have a more open, transparent legislative process. This is what it looks like. We propose ideas, we get feedback, we make changes, we present it, we hear more feedback, and we decide if it is ready to move forward or not. And so what has been proposed, again, is not going to be the final versions for either of these things. And really, we want to give folks an opportunity to speak on what has been proposed to suggest changes to improve things. I think when we have more voices at the table, it comes out with better policy. So this is the intent. Hopefully that calms some fears. I know folks sent testimony really concerned about the state of the original legislation, but again, this is just the beginning. We will have more engagement going forward. We'll start this hearing, testimony on utility reselling, and then we'll move to our discussion around pollinator gardens. Again, I want to welcome everyone for being here, and thank you for those who are able to send testimony written or those who are here to speak today. Regarding utility reselling, it has been reported that reselling of utilities has inflated residential utility bills. At a time when inflation is at an all-time high and the cost of every aspect of living is expected to continue to rise, we as elected officials have to do everything in our power to make sure residents of all income levels can thrive in our city. The proposed ordinance we are reviewing today is a reintroduction from former Columbus City Council member Michael Stenziano back in 2017. Since then, more of our residents are living in multi-unit buildings, and we're also incentivizing more density, making the discussion we're having today even more important. Banning submetering would not only help with costs, it would also give our residents access to consumer protections, billing transparency, and serve as a way to hold providers accountable. However, I understand that the utility reselling provides a service to landlords and that there may be a middle ground that exists where these companies can continue to operate while also protecting our residents. I'm grateful to the individuals who have come to this meeting to help us explore what that middle ground may be. It is my hope that that the testimony we receive through the committee process will inform the final language that is brought before the full council for a vote. With that being said, I'd like to start the hearing by calling Grant Ames with the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging to speak a little bit about what he is seeing with his constituents. I want to thank you for being here, Grant, and for all the work that you all are doing in the community. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Chair Weish. I'm Grant Ames. I'm the Government and Strategic Initiatives Manager with the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging. COAAA serves roughly 11,000 residents across the 8 Central Ohio counties that we serve, Franklin County and all of the contiguous counties, and provide home and community-based services to help individuals that qualify for Medicaid and Medicare programs to stay independent in their homes. Our case managers, who are licensed nurses and social workers, conducted over almost 47,000 home visits last year to those individuals, and we really see ourselves as a lifeline to them in being able to stay independent, socially engaged, and healthy as they remain in community. Thank you for proposing this important legislation tonight. We are really seeing housing costs become a major issue in the availability of and access to staying in someone's home. Utilities are one of the main concerns when we're talking to folks about what that looks like. Over 27% of Columbus residents over the age of 60 are renting their homes, and of those folks, over 64% of them are housing cost burdened. So what I mean by that is they're paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. We know that the average Social Security award that folks are receiving in the community that are over 60 is about $940 a month. So as you can imagine, that doesn't stretch very far when they're making these difficult decisions. Often they're having to make decisions between paying for their rent, utilities, visiting family, being able to afford healthy, nutritious food, and making healthcare decisions, whether that's the medications that they're purchasing, trips to the doctor, things like that. So we really think that this is valuable legislation to make sure that folks have access to programs and supports to make utilities more affordable for them. I want to highlight some of the things that we think this legislation can impact. This proposed legislation can improve transparency. It'll allow the folks that are living in low-income buildings or living in apartment buildings across the city to be able to understand what their utility bills are going to be every month. They can plan for that. They can make decisions based on what they know that those utilities are going to be. Right now, they don't have the ability to do that. They may have a general idea of what that is, but without being the customer for that utility, it becomes difficult to know exactly what that's going to be and to plan for it. This will allow them to, and then also this will allow them to have more access to utility assistance programs. So if you are someone who is eligible for a program such as HEAP, which is the Heating and Energy Assistance Program through the state of Ohio, you have to be that utility customer in that situation. We help hundreds of individuals across the city and across our 8 counties apply for that program every year. They have to be the listed utility customer. They have to provide their utility information, their customer ID number, and all of that information on their application. So some of them are barred from participating in that program because they're not the utility customer. So because of that, they have limited access to those programs, and we really feel like this legislation opens the door to accessing those programs going forward. We think that the transparency and control that older adults will have through this legislation will provide clear and accurate understanding of utility costs. Many rely on landlords to pay their utility bills, are unable to plan for the utility consumption, and have to adjust accordingly in their personal budgets. Utility reselling limits tenants' ability to plan and could require tenants to pay more than their fair share in utility costs. We feel like this proposal will provide increased transparency and support older adults in being able to remain in their homes for a long time. I also want to make a plug in regards to the pollinator garden legislation. We work closely with the city attorney's office in regards to abatement cases for older adults that may have difficulty with maintaining their exterior of their home. We really feel like another option for those homeowners would be one that they would welcome, helping them to maintain the outside of their home while we have volunteer programs that certainly provide that support. This additional option we feel like would be welcomed by those folks and would certainly be something that we would be supportive of. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, again, thank you for being here, and thank you for providing kind of that overview of the challenges that you're seeing from your constituents. I don't know if I have any specific questions. I do want to acknowledge my colleague, Councilmember Beatty, for joining me this evening. I don't know if you have any opening remarks or any questions specific for Grant. Nothing at this time, but thank you again for kind of highlighting the challenge that currently exists out there for residents. We're going to switch gears and talk about the art of what is possible. So I want to hand the floor over to Naya Walters with Council's Legislative Research Office to give us a quick presentation on what is currently being proposed and why. Naya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Could I get my PowerPoint on the slides, please? Thank you. Good evening, council members White and Beatty. Thank you to everyone in the community for joining us for this hearing today. I'm excited to share some information with you about sub-metering and utility reselling. Really just want to start off by setting the floor so folks that are not super familiar with this topic can have an understanding of what this means and what it is. So sub-metering is the installation of metering devices with the ability to measure utility usage after the primary utility meter or master meter, offering the ability to monitor this usage for individual tenants, departments, pieces of equipment, or other loads individually to account for their actual utility usage. Utility reselling is the practice of third-party purchasing of electricity, water, gas, etc. from regulated public utilities and reselling them to an individual consumer. Typically, the third party also administers the billing to the consumer. So here are some of the services that are offered: submetering, billing administration, and ratio utility billing systems, which allocates the property's actual utility bill to the residents based on the occupant factor, square footage factor, or a combination of both. How can profit be earned in these businesses? It's usually through the equipment sales and installation, the fees, and the rate arbitrage. The value of this to property owners, the administration and billing is taken over by a third party, and property owners don't have to have the administrative overhead. Typically, there are two distinct aspects of regulation. For submetering, which is often permitted with regulations and is sometimes required in some jurisdictions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Reselling is heavily regulated in many states, particularly the practice of charging more for utility after it is resold. For submarine regulation, there are currently 23 states, as well as Washington, D.C., that have statutes, regulations, or rulings on submetering. State approaches tend to vary, but the policies may establish provisions for acceptable uses of submetering in properties, creating a mechanism for determining customer charges and determining if building owners may charge customers additional fees. Some of the states more recently and some municipalities require the use of submeters in some instances in order to obtain more accurate monitoring of utility use. For example, in Georgia in 2010, they had the Water Stewardship Act, which required submetering on each of the new multi-unit residential buildings and certain retail and light industrial buildings that were granted a construction permit after July 1st, 2012. The city of New York passed Local Law 88 in 2016, which required all common areas in residential buildings and non-residential buildings over 25,000 square feet to install submeters by this year. It was one of the first major cities to require submeters. For reselling, 29 states and some municipalities regulate in some form the ability to charge a consumer more than the utility cost for the regulated utility. 13 additional states have laws in place that partially limit the practice but differ in their interpretation of what that looks like. And they come in the forms of limits on monthly, quarterly, or yearly fees charged, or limiting the resale cost of the utility itself. So a couple of examples. In Massachusetts, a landlord cannot charge or recover or allow to be charged or recovered any additional servicing, administrative, establishment, meter reading, meter testing, billing, or submetering fee or other fee whatsoever, however denominated. In the city of Seattle, all charges for any utility service included in the bills sent to all units cumulatively shall not exceed the amount of the bill sent by the utility itself to the building for a whole, less any late charges, interest, or other penalties that were owed. Currently, Ohio has some regulations in place to limit the ability for submetering companies to profit from the marking up of the cost of utilities. A 2017 ruling stated that submetering companies can charge no more than what a regulated utility could charge, with limited exceptions. Here are a couple of consumer issues. So in 2013, the dispatch conducted an investigation that details the stories of consumers that were charged between 5 to 40% higher than the average bill from a regulated utility. In 2015, there was a complaint filed with the PUCO against a submetering company on the basis that the company should be regulated by the PUCO as a public utility. So that is like an AEP where they are regulated by the PUCO, because currently a lot of the resellers and submeters are not regulated or treated as a regulated entity under Ohio law. In 2016, the PUCO expanded its view of what resellers would be treated like as a regulated utilities. However, the Ohio Consumers Council, Ohio Poverty Law Center, as well as some of the representatives from the submetering industry have encouraged further clarification on what that regulation looks like. There are some bills currently in the General Assembly, House Bill 173 and Senate Bill 108. These bills propose a couple of things, one being exempting behind-the-meter utility services and bill services for retail natural gas or water in certain circumstances from being classified as a public utility and thus subject to regulation by the PUCO. They create various provisions that are applicable to behind-the-meter utility services, such as prohibiting certain providers from charging more than the applicable standard service offer, allowing the PUCO to require the registration of certain providers and establish a fee. It also allows the PUCO to require certain disclosures and establishes a complaint process and forfeiture for compliance failure. So those are some of the bills that are in the State House currently. They are as introduced bills, so they have not gone through the committee process, so it is unclear if we'll see any movement on those through the General Assembly. Why this is important to the council member's office is specifically to what Grant shared about protecting our most critically important discount programs for our most vulnerable residents, which includes seniors and low-income individuals. Currently, the city's low-income discount program is for multi-unit properties that are based on a master meter, meaning that they are not accessible to those that are currently being submetered. And so they wouldn't qualify. Additionally, entities that are not regulated do not have the same obligations for consumer protections, transparency, or an accountability mechanism to be held accountable by the consumer currently. And so that is why this is such an important issue. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation for this afternoon. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for providing that overview and a little more detail about utility reselling. It is confusing. It's a lot of the same words used in different forms that all kind of mean the same thing, but without that clarity, it can be hard for the layman person to understand what is happening. Councilmember Beatty, I just want to kick it to you, check, see if you have any questions for Naya. Naya, appreciate you giving that overview. I think we did have a couple of folks go ahead and submit request to speak on this legislation. So I'm going to start with the first person on the list. We have Teresa Ringenbach with Nationwide Energy Partners. Teresa, thank you for joining us today. If you mind coming up to the podium.
Councilmember Weish, Councilmember Beatty, thank you for letting me speak today. I'm with Nationwide Energy Partners, and we are a 25-year-old company who's been offering submetering services in Columbus that entire time. I'm not going to read through everything I provided. I did provide to the council members benefits pamphlet and everything else that we're doing, but I do want to address a couple of things. The first is in 2023, the PUCO has most recently issued another order that says that all of the utilities must have a submetering tariff. That tariff also puts in place the bill cap language that is in Senate Bill 108 and House Bill 173. That tariff also requires that any landlord who submeters in the state in a public utility area must also have certain disclosures, including what I want to reference next, which is there are low-income programs that are available. HEAP is available as long as you have a utility bill, even if it's a separate submetered utility bill. So HEAP is not available if you are master metered and it's just embedded in your rent and you can't see it. But it is available when you're separately metered and separately billed. And we do have an entire call center that helps people get in touch with community action agencies, not only for HEAP, but also for other programs that are available, and NEP specifically has other low-income programs that we offer. PIP, however, is not. That's only if you are with the regulated public utility, so even the City of Columbus residents cannot access PIP. That is actually by a regulation at the state level, which we have actively and vocally said should be changed. I also want to point out that there's a few other things that are provided when you have a separate submetered bill and what we do up to the cap. So NEP offers properties that are NEP clients what's called apartment facts, meaning before you sign your lease, you can actually see the usage month by month with an estimated cost for the actual unit that you are going to move into. We also have seen over the winter months, especially in Columbus due to building codes, that people who have heat pump HVAC systems, when the outside air hits 32 degrees or below, those turn into electric resistance, just sucking power. So we actively will send high bill usage alerts and text messages to the residents in NEP properties when we see them doing something that's going to cause them to have a high bill. And then afterwards, you can actually get daily usage to the weather along with what your usage was. So you can see that by setting your thermostat at that level, you're actually pulling way too much power. So to the gentleman's point, we try to give more information. And then finally, New York was referenced. I will encourage you, and I can send it to you, the state of New York through the Department of Public Service actually has explicit rules and regulations, which we would fully support in the state of Ohio. They include everything, including you can have the arbitrage up to the bill cap. They require certain levels of metering. They require testing of that metering. They require that you have an energy efficiency or a demand response program in order to master meter. And the reason that they put it in Local Rule 88 is because that was focused on moving the entire city to carbon neutrality, something that NEP is already doing on a whole property level, using that, the arbitrage value that we get out of those properties. So I look forward to more conversations. I appreciate you saying this is the first of many, and I hope that we can be an educational resource and just, as a good business member of the City of Columbus, participate in these conversations.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to kind of engaging in this work. I feel like sometimes people instantly put up their guard and say, we're going to fight tooth and nail against anything you would ever do. The reality is, it seems like there are some in the industry who are like, hey, we would love fully established rules. We just need to know what they are and be consistent. So.
And our concern is we don't want it to conflict with what we're already complying with from the state level.
No, I appreciate that.
Yep.
You mentioned that PUCO order. Did it establish a specific manner for comparison to similar situated customers served by close by utility? So assuming your multi-unit building is here, another single unit building's on the other side of the street, they're clearly going to have two different utility setups. I know there's a lot of comparison to say our rates are the same as basically those across the street. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
So this actually happened in 2017. The PUCO at that time had said, you cannot charge more than what that residential customer would have been charged by, I'm just going to say AEP Ohio, on a total bill basis. And then as part of that, they actually mandated that every public utility in the state have a sub-metering calculator. So you can look at your bill from NEP, take the per kilowatt hour total usage, plug it into that calculator, and that total bill amount for your electricity should match up. So that is already out there. They reaffirmed it in the 2023 order and said, yes, every utility needs to now also have these disclosures. You can't go above the bill caps. They added to it. But those sub-metering calculators have been out there for a long time now. We actively push it to residents too. We have what we call our rate guarantee, which is if we don't match up to what that calculator is, you get a credit back. Not just to, I think it's a credit plus like $100 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So we encourage people to use it. On the water side, we provide the water utility tariffs, and we will walk people through it. It's not as simple with the City of Columbus Water. They don't have an easy bill calculator. And then the PUCO themselves also has a bill calculator. So you can go to the PUCO's website, and you have these very independent public agencies, so you can compare and make sure that your bill is accurate.
And I appreciate that. I also appreciate you kind of pointing out the issues related to Columbus Public Water. So, is there ability for us to develop something similar for folks to have that same comparison?
I would be very, very supportive of that. I think it makes it easier for people to see what's going on. I will give the water department another compliment, though. So we, at the master meter level, if we see a leak in your unit, we'll tell the individual living there, you have a leak. We'll tell the property owner, we'll get it fixed. And then what we'll do is we'll give a credit back to the resident on their bill for what equates to that leak. And then that transfers to the property owner's bill. And then the property owner has the ability to go back to the City of Columbus and get a credit back for their sewer charges. Mm-hmm. So there is a benefit that comes back when you identify leaks and actually reduce that usage and don't just ignore them. And so that's my compliment to City of Columbus.
Oh, well, I mean, public utilities is great, so hands down. So thank you for that. I do want to ask, and it is great when folks can kind of advocate for things that are specific kind of in their realm and their sector. I think what we are seeing, though, as we are growing as a city, because of the type of growth that we are having, utility rates are going to go up. Right. And so there are things that we could be doing within building code or even just within individuals making those choices for their facilities, as far as on-site solar or ensuring that all appliances are Energy Star rated, so we're reducing water consumption, vegetative roofs to reduce stormwater runoff. I feel like we have to get to a point where everyone is playing a role in reducing utility usage. Is that something that Nationwide would be advocating for?
Yes, and we already help with a lot of that. So the city has certain codes that require property owners to identify their total community usage. By having a master meter, we're able to provide that, and we provide it without actually raising rent or the bill that the resident sees by using that arbitrage. As far as going carbon neutral, as I said, all of our properties not only are carbon neutral, but we can identify exactly where that gen came from so that they can report it on their ESG reporting. We actually put the rec certificate numbers on a plaque that goes in the office of property management, so a resident can actually go look at that number, see when it was generated, where it was generated. A little, not big on greenwashing, so I'm very intense on give them the facts.
Yeah.
As far as on-site solar, I think what we found for multifamily specifically is the space versus what they can produce is not always an efficient use of that space. And then you have the other problem, which is nobody wants to take out a benefit, which is like a playground or something like that, in order to put in solar. So we have actually been working with channel partners to help identify other ways that we can do some sort of on-site gen and help that out. And then, not to get too meta, but I am an energy nerd for 25 years. NEP today has devices on electric water heaters in the buildings in Columbus. And that helps reduce demand at peak times. And when you reduce demand at peak times, you help the entire regional grid. And transmission and demand is what's driving the increase in costs. So anything that we are already doing that brings demand down has a ripple effect of bringing down costs for everybody.
No, I appreciate that, and glad to see that you guys are doing a lot of this work to kind of already kind of address the challenge that are existing kind of in the utility market. I think that is I'm sorry, I did have one question in terms of building switching to kind of a nationwide energy partner. I know if I am on a budgeted billing plan with the utility provider directly, is that something that also translates over if the building goes to a sub-metering process or no?
Yes, so there's a couple of things that happen when you're in an existing building and you switch over. So one is the property owner has the ability to negotiate with us. Like if you're on PIP and you have a PIP debt that's left over, right? You will get a final bill from whoever your prior provider was.
Yeah.
But from NEP's perspective, your power's on day one. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you don't pay them or not. That's probably a bad thing to say in a public setting, right? But when you move in, your power is on. You are starting fresh and clear. I'm not asking for a deposit. I'm not doing a credit check. And that also goes to the next NEP property that you move to. You're starting fresh day one. Your power is on day one. Welcome to your new home. Let's all move forward.
Appreciate it. Councilmember Beatty, any questions for Teresa? Thank you again for being here and for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Next, I have Dimitri Hatzifotinos. I tried, Dimitri. I'm sure I butchered that. My apologies. With the Apartment Association. If you can just correct my butchering of your last name, I will hand the floor over to you.
Councilmember Weishi, Councilmember Beatty, Dimitri Hatzifotinos on behalf of the Apartment Association here in Columbus. There will not be a spelling test. I say that joke every time I'm up here, so I'll say it again, on my last name, that is. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Teresa for saying all those things way better than I possibly could have, because I wanted there to be some kind of mathematical equation behind what I'm going to say in terms of how the regulatory structure for sub-metering and reselling works, because I'm here really to talk more about the legislation that you've proposed. And the CAA is a member organization which is comprised of around 250,000 residential rental units around Ohio. And I want to give a big shout out to the 100 or so people that are behind me here that are all multifamily managers in this industry. And the reason they're all here is because the CAA is concerned with this legislation and what it potentially means as a practical cost for the human beings who are here today, who are actually in the trenches managing multifamily. So I'm going to talk about 4 different things. I'm going to start with 2 things that I think are a little bit negative, and then as we move on, I'll get positive and talk about how maybe we can collaborate as an apartment association with the city to try to find some solutions. So the first and most important thing I have to say today is that criminalizing a business practice from the multifamily industry is something that this apartment association can never support. The reason the management teams are here today is because they're the people that would actually be criminalized. So for example, you have a water bill from the city of Columbus that's billed quarterly. You hire a company to submeter that water bill. That water bill then gets given to all of your tenants. I happen to live in a condo in the city of Columbus, and here's a Guardian Water and Power water bill. The water bill has the usage right on it. It doesn't charge anything more than the water bill plus the fee that the city would charge the master meter, but it charges it specifically to the resident, which is me in this case. If that bill is higher or lower because of a mistake, if ratio utility billing is used as opposed to submetering, or if it's a flat rate water fee, according to your legislation, and the water fluctuates and demand goes down, your legislation actually criminalizes a higher bill. So in commercial settings, in multifamily, or in the real estate industry, you'll see a true up at the end of the year a lot of times in commercial settings because we don't exactly know what our bill's going to be. We bill it every month, but then we get billed in arrears every 3 months. So one of the things that happens in your particular legislation is we give you a bill in month 1, Columbus gives us a bill in month 3, that bill has fluctuated by $1 to the resident's favor, and you've made that a crime. So that incentivizes the landlord to take away the water bill or the electric bill or the gas bill and to put it in the rent. At that point, we've now done something legislatively that is negative for everyone, which is we have disincentivized conservation. So the second big point that I want to make today is that we want to be partners in conservation. And while solar power is amazing, and some of the things that the city has incentivized with new builds is amazing, the people behind me right now are in existing buildings. Those buildings may be doubles, they may be 13 units, they may be 150 units in 15 different buildings. One thing that a lot of those units have in common is that they have one water pipe that goes into all of those units. So if I have one water pipe that goes into all of the units, and I don't submeter, and I have to pay for the cost of the infrastructure of the submeter, I have to pay for somebody to administer the submetering, then that master meter gets pushed out to the tenants in whatever way it does. We bill them a flat $50 a month in water, we bill them a percentage based on their composition in the unit and how big the unit is. In the 1970s, when submetering became a thing, according to the National Apartment Association, submetering took the rate of water usage, or the demand, in Teresa's words, down 40%. So the common practice since the 1970s, particularly in Columbus, particularly in some of the older housing stock with the most rent-burdened people, is to submeter so that the usage goes down, so that the tenant ultimately pays less water, specifically water. And in addition to that, the landlord can keep the measurement monthly. We give you a monthly bill so that the tenant isn't burdened with a bill 3 months later that they don't know anything about. So in the case of water, what if there is a leak and you didn't know it and it's subgrade and all of a sudden it's 3 months old? And that now sewer credit that the city routinely gives for a leak doesn't really make a difference because it's 3 months worth of water and no one can afford it. So that conservation piece isn't met by your legislation because you're incentivizing a landlord to not bill separately for utilities and to add it in the rent. I think that policy decision will actually lead to less conservation, more demand, and ultimately a bad product. We actually want to see more submeters so that we can bring the demand down as much as possible because at the state level, a landlord has to pay for their water on their tax bill regardless of whether the tenant pays the landlord back or not. Right? So the landlord wants that usage to stay low. They want that to be passed through dollar for dollar. And then companies like Guardian Water and Power, which bills my particular water bill at my house, charges a small fee of $5 to administer that because they're experts at the administration. If the landlord has to administer their own submeters, that cost just goes up because landlords don't do that for a living. In addition to the conservation, I want to bring up to a lesser degree that there are already regulations for all of this. Teresa did a much better job than me about talking about the 167-page decision of the PUCO in 2003. A couple things I will bring up just to hit on that a little bit better is it requires disclosure of the measurement of utilities. To me, and I'll talk later about this, that is the most important thing we can all focus on. If a resident who is rent burdened is out there and they don't know how much they're using or how much they're paying, that is the point of frustration in the process. In addition to that, if they don't have an ability to come back to the landlord and say, well, I think I paid too much because, that's a problem. So disclosure is a big piece of that PUCO decision. In addition to that, the tariff requires that the rate of utilities is passed through dollar for dollar with the same measured fee that AEP, Columbia Gas, or the City of Columbus would charge. So no one is trying to charge more than the utility, but there are fees charged for the administration, which public utilities charge. Your legislation criminalizes charging those fees that are necessary for the operation of these third-party groups that submeter. So that is a problem that the industry sees. In addition to that, one of the things that the opinion goes through with respect to landlords is the PUCO is very concerned that landlords would be shutting off utilities of residents as a method of self-help. You didn't pay your water bill, it's master metered, I can just shut you off because I'm going to tell whoever the third-party biller is to shut it off. I wanted to make a point today to say that the Landlord-Tenant Act protects tenants against self-help, and one of the methods of self-help that landlords are required already through the state regulatory framework to hold on to is you can't shut off utilities for non-payment of rent. So you have to go through the eviction process. Within the eviction process, we still have impact in some of the federal ERA dollars that are out there administered through the city's Department of Development. Give a shout out to Kim Stans. They've done a great job administering that money. Utilities can be included in that money. So if utilities aren't being paid because somebody can't pay, they go to eviction court or they don't, there's still city dollars out there that are paying for those utilities now. And as long as we can disclose what they are and measure them, the bill goes to the impact provider or the City of Columbus Department of Development, which is Greenwood's, what it's called, and then the money gets paid. So we still have that piece. You can't just shut it off. In addition to that, and this becomes now a more legal issue, a few years ago, the Apartment Association went to the state and asked that 532119 be passed, which basically says where a landlord already has an active contract with a tenant, a lease, whatever municipal legislation gets passed cannot interfere with an active contract. So all of the people behind you are very nervous, which is why they're all here, because they have a pattern in practice of using a lease that has a utility addendum that says this is submetered, or this is ratio utility billed, or this is your water bill, or whatever it says. And if this legislation would get passed as written, that could potentially criminalize an active executory contract between the players in the game. If your lease is over in January of 2026, the next 7 months are criminal, even though we have a past practice of engaging in this lease for however long. So that is already regulated at the state level. And in addition, 532113 indicates that if a tenant has a problem with something that is unconscionable in a lease, they have a remedy. They can go to court, put their rent in escrow, and have one of the magistrates in municipal court here in Franklin County tell the landlord, hey, that water bill is too expensive, it's unconscionable, I'm tossing it. And they have the power from the state perspective to do that. So in addition to the disclosure, which is one of the pieces of my fourth prong, which is education, I think that, so you have a disclosure that's required. If the city wants to require that, that's fine. The state requires that already through the PUCO, but we really need to educate landlords and tenants on the benefits of submetering for conservation, being able to take what we consider a bad apple and figure out a way to make what they're doing in terms of their billing practices unconscionable through the judicial process, because that already exists. The city, through its Housing for All legislation, already passed legislation in December that is going to put more money in the hands of third parties like legal aid to help expand the legal resources, the bucket of legal tools here in Columbus to help people that might have that burden. So we need to outreach from the Columbus Apartment Association, from legal aid, from city council, from development, from the city attorney's office, collectively to try to get the word out, hey, if the landlord isn't following these rules, this recipe for disclosure and billing practices, you have a legal remedy. And I have been at the city talking for what feels like 20 years, probably has been. I always say when I finish here that I'm more than happy to lend my personal services for free to educate wherever it's necessary, because I think that's the most important prong regardless of what legislation you pass. The only thing that I'll say in conclusion is different types of properties in Columbus and different age-old properties have different needs with respect to billing based on the way the pipes were built. So whatever we strategize legislatively, what we don't want to do is prohibit practices that are bringing down the usage, because that will cause inflation. If you push all of the utilities into the rent, you will raise the rent, and the landlords aren't going to raise the rent 80% of what their utility bill could be. They're going to raise it 120% because they don't know what it's going to be. And just like my dorm room my freshman year in college, which didn't charge me for utilities, I left the lights on as an 18-year-old kid. Somebody else is going to do that too. So that's all I have for today. Any questions?
Not a question, just a couple comments. So one, I agree. Like the education piece on how we do conservation is real. I think anyone who lives in a home or is in an apartment, like that is something that we need to educate residents on, because we could all be doing our part to reduce our utility usage and the bills that we all end up paying. So I appreciate you kind of pointing that out. And then your notes regarding kind of our current buildings and how we can go about incentivizing them to kind of do some of these more sustainable practices. That is something my office is also looking at as well. So we're not leaving those folks behind. We also want to work with them to kind of help support making that transition for them as well. So I do appreciate you being here and your willingness to kind of engage in this process. I think one of the things that I failed to ask Teresa, but we want to see those appendix, right? As we kind of get a sense from different providers out there on the information they are actually providing. The more information we get from those who are providing those appendices before folks sign their lease, the better we can ensure that that information is consistent across the line so all residents are seeing the same thing.
Well, this legislation really criminalizes or regulates landlords, not the submetering company, right? Yeah. The submetering company is secondary. So on behalf of landlords, first and foremost, we would love to be at the table in the event a new draft of this legislation comes out. I know this is from 2017 from Stinziano. I appreciate that. There are things that have changed since then. I personally think this needs to be rewritten, and it needs to be more reflective of some of the feedback here, and we'd be happy to be part of that process, number one. Number two, we can provide, there's really only 5 or 6, 7 companies that probably do the vast majority of billing, whether it's water or electric, around town. It would not be a very difficult thing to provide some of those statistics, some of the disclosures from each individual place of how that meter disclosure works, and so that you can say, listen, if we're going to draft legislation, we just want this to stay within that disclosure box. Mm-hmm. Then what we would prefer, what we would ask for is, this is not something that should be criminalized. If this is something that has some kind of a civil remedy, if it's wrong, that gives the tenant another tool in their toolbox to go through the code process or to go through the escrow process. That's fine. We can talk about that. But criminalization puts us in a whole different bucket. And again, I know everyone behind me is supportive of what I'm saying, but they also don't want to be here either. So we'd love to collaborate.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. Yes, there will be collaboration. Yes, we also want you at the table. No, we don't want to send people to jail for trying to do the right thing and figure out what is going on. I don't know why in 2017 we were so harsh on people, but it's a new day today.
We were very nervous.
Yeah, no, you're good. And that is something we've also talked about internally in terms of what does this actually look like in practice, right? How do folks actually comply the right way, and in what manner do they actually do it, and what is the stick, right? What is the force that needs to be applied to ensure that folks are doing the right thing?
Exactly.
A felony is probably not it.
Probably not a good idea, yeah. The people behind me work very, very hard, and one of the things that they're always nervous about, and one of the reasons I have a job, is they're scared about the legal consequences of what they're doing in their business. And so what we want to do is help them. We want to enable them to get better, not tell them they're doing something wrong, because they're the ones that are doing all the work that are helping residents on a daily basis. So
appreciate it. All right. Thank you so much,
Yep,
Dimitri.
appreciate it.
Next, we have Steve Papanou. Steve, I'm sure I also butchered your last name too. Yeah, who is a local property owner who signed up to speak today.
Thank you for your time. So the issue with going that far down on the list is a lot of things that I wanted to cover have now been covered.
No, that's a good,
And-
repetitive
Well,
comments are always helpful.
I used to be a city councilman for the city of Grandview Heights, and it would bother me when people just keep repeating the same things over and over again. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be very brief. I'm just going to give you one example that I thought of that wasn't covered so far. So in some of the units, we have master meters. Some of the units, we have different ways that we can charge for water, electric, things like that. Some of the units that have their own water meter, if this legislation goes through as it is, we would be having them go directly through City of Columbus or through the water. They're going to get a bill every 3 months. And as the gentleman here spoke before, that's not good. People don't want to get a bill every 3 months. They want to get it each month. And that's one of the things that submetering does, is helps people to, number one, figure out what their bill is going to be regularly. It's not going to be 3 months. Or what happens if we don't get the bill for, after they move out? They're going to get a bill several months later after they've moved on. That doesn't work. One of the things about submetering that it does is it helps people regulate their budgets. It helps give them exactly what it's going to be charged. They know what their rent is. They know generally what their electric is. Water is one of those things that they're going to get quarterly. And this will help people, elderly people, young people, any people that are out there, to help keep their budgets on track. So, if we could find a way to do it where people can regularly get a bill and they can manage their budget, I think that's generally going to help all consumers, and which I believe, the legislation is here to really help do.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Well, I appreciate you being here and providing that testimony. I will say monthly billing is something that the department is also investigating, so hopefully more to come on that over the next couple of months. But we know it's an issue, like for folks to kind of really budget on a regular basis, and it's good for you to kind of call that out because it does help us to work internally to say that this is a problem, this is something we need to address, and kind of make the encouragement to get it done sooner rather than later.
Great.
So thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right, and then the last person to actually sign up was Benji Jackson with Star High Management. And I think in this circumstance, maybe I butchered your first name, sir?
Well, first off, I do apologize because I'm going to go ahead, I got up at 1 o'clock and wrote this, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. I do feel bad because I did not realize that this is from 2017. So understand that there's nothing personal, but when
Stenziano's not here, so you say
so
whatever you need to do.
I just wanted to make sure I said that, but good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Benji Jackson, and I come before you on behalf of housing providers and property owners throughout the city of Columbus who are committed to delivering quality, affordable housing to thousands of residents. I have the absolute joy of overseeing over 2,900 units throughout the U.S., with 1,206 of those units being here in Columbus. And so we, of course, stand in strong opposition to the proposed Chapter 1172, while we share the city's commitment to fair and affordable utility access. This legislation, as currently written, creates broad, sweeping restrictions that will have unintended consequences to both property owners and residents that we serve. First, the ordinance penalizes the housing providers who use established and lawful submetering practices to promote conservation, allocate cost fairly, and ensure residents pay for only what they use. Submetering encourages responsible usage and empowers residents to control their consumption, as NEP stated earlier. Eliminating these tools not only remove transparency, but it increases overall housing costs that would otherwise be distributed more equitably. Second, the claims that residents are being charged more than utility providers would bill them directly does not reflect the operational realities of multifamily housing. When utilities are bundled into rent, residents lose the ability to see and manage their usage. With utility reselling and submetering, we provide a clear breakdown, and the costs in many cases are less than the standard rates, especially when purchasing or competitive supply contracts are leveraged. Third, the ordinance disregards the infrastructure, administrative costs, and the compliance requirements property owners must manage, mandating exact parity with utility company pricing without acknowledging these operational realities sets an unfair and unworkable standard. It also contradicts the city's goal of promoting energy efficiency and conservation through accountability and data-driven consumption tracking. Finally, the proposal's criminal penalties for what are standard industry practices is deeply concerning precedents. We believe that this will have a chilling effect on investments in new housing, reducing housing affordability in the long term, and adding unnecessary burdens to both providers and tenants. Instead of the blanket prohibition, we urge the committee to encourage us to be at the table, to sit there and not be on the menu, because at the end of the day, we know what's happening and what's going on. We welcome the regulations that enhance disclosure, promotes fairness, and prevents abuse, but Chapter 1172 as written overreaches and risks harming the very residents that we intend to protect. Thank you.
And thank you for being here. And yes, we very much noted that we, one, want the property owners to be at the table. We want the sub-metering companies to be at the table. The more voices, the better the policy. And so I appreciate you being here and providing your testimony.
Not to mention the fat fingering that happens when we have to try to actually put it in ourselves. So, we need somebody else to do it for us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. That was it for everyone who signed up, but we do have some time, so I want to ask, is there anyone else in the room who'd like to speak on sub-metering before we move on? All right, seeing no one, we will now move to our portion of the hearing dedicated to our pollinator discussion. This initiative to define pollinator gardens in city code. All right, I'm going to give folks a second to leave before I dive in. All right. So, as I was saying, around pollinator gardens, this initiative to define pollinator gardens in city code will help residents who are trying to do their part for our pollinators stay out of court. It will also help alleviate the burden on our court system. Many of our pollinators are on our endangered species list. Most people know about the shrinking bee population, but there are many beneficial pollinators that are also in danger of extinction. Pollinator gardens provide food and shelter for many of our pollinators, increasing their chance for survival. While some people do not like the look of pollinator gardens, our very own survival is tied with that of our pollinators. Additionally, they help with stormwater management, reduce heat island effect, and provide various ecosystem ecosystem services, including beautification and biodiversity. There are just a few reasons why I'm excited to bring this code change forward to discussion. As a big gardener myself, I love pollinators, so the idea that we would be restricting their growth in the city of Columbus just didn't sit well with me. So I'm glad we're here to kind of have this discussion on the art of the possible in terms of encouraging folks to have pollinator gardens. To kick this part of the hearing off, I want to turn the floor over to Karima Samadi, policy analyst with Columbus Public Health. You're welcome to stay right there, and the floor is yours.
All right. Good afternoon, Councilmember and Chair White and Councilmember Beatty, Council staff. As you said, my name is Karima Samadi, and I'm a policy analyst with a focus in food systems at Columbus Public Health. And I'm joined here by our policy director, Tynita White. Thank you for allowing us to speak tonight about pollinator gardens and their importance to our community food access. I'm here to urge you to codify pollinator gardens in our city code because these small patches of habitat, as you mentioned, have an outsized impact on our food system and environmental health. About 75% of the world's flowering plants and 35% of our food crops depend on pollinators to grow our food. However, pollinator populations are declining dramatically due to habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change. Without pollinators, our food supply would become scarce and expensive. Much like how a lack of trees in urban heat islands can create a desert of canopy and reduce cooling effects, the lack of pollinator gardens in communities affect the green space, habitat, and ultimately the ecosystem, which lead to a reduced food production in communities that are already food deserts. Creating pollinator gardens throughout Columbus offers a simple but powerful solution. These gardens provide food and shelter for pollinators while creating beautiful green spaces for our communities to enjoy. Additionally, supporting pollinator gardens directly advances Goal Area B5 of our Columbus and Franklin County Local Food Action Plan, which aims to, quote, grow capacity and enhance viability of urban agriculture to allow residents to grow food for themselves and their neighbors. When we support pollinators, we make every community garden, backyard vegetable plot, including your own, and urban farm more productive, which, by the way, we have over 350 community gardens in Columbus and Franklin County, which we should be really proud of. I've seen this firsthand at Franklinton Farms, where a pollinator pocket garden next to a vegetable plot greatly increases production, allowing for a higher yield of fruits and vegetables to feed Franklinton neighborhood residents. The difference in harvest between properly pollinated plants and those without sufficient pollination is clearly visible with bigger, fuller, more nutritious, delicious food. Higher crop yields also mean more residents have food to take home to feed their families. So we urge you to first clearly define pollinators in our city code, which I know we'll do. Secondly, reduce barriers that might prevent residents from creating these vital habitats. And third, consider urban agriculture incentives to encourage more pollinator-friendly spaces throughout Columbus. This is an opportunity for Columbus to take a lead on an issue that connects environmental sustainability with food security. And by taking these steps, we can create a more resilient food system that aligns with the mission of CPH, which is to protect health and improve lives. So thank you for your consideration and time.
Well, thank you for the testimony, and thank you for being here as well as supporting our pollinators. We need more folks to do that. So we always know, my office knows that you're a big champion in this space, and so we're excited that you're willing to come down and kind of speak to that. Next, we have Ken Keisel. And Ken, if you want to come up to the podium. Ken was one of the first residents that came to council to bring concerns around our city code and pollinator gardens. Ken was taken to court and made to remove his milkweed, which alerted me to the fact that milkweed should have been removed from the noxious weed list in our code back in, again, 2017. I don't know what happened that year, but they was making some mistakes. But it was inadvertently left in one section of code. We made that fix last year, but really it just started the discussion on what more we could do to kind of support our pollinators and those who are trying to do the right thing. So Ken, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
First, I'd like to thank the council members, Councilmember White. Did I say that correctly? White. Councilmember Beatty, And I'd also like to thank President Hardin for his swift reaction to my meeting here in September. The swift vote to remove common milkweed from the places where it had been inadvertently left on the zoning noxious weeds list. And also to Chelsea, if she's here. There you are. Finally get to put a face to the name. Who was very instrumental in drafting a letter to Judge Mingo's court, which I did take to the court and present to the court. I'll get to that in just a moment. Let me start by saying that I have a degree in zoology from the Great Ohio State University with a specialty in reproductive biology and environmental biology. The location of my property in particular is in Clintonville, zip code 43202, which is completely within the city of Columbus. It is not subject to the jurisdiction of any other community such as Riverlea or Worthington. So it is completely under the jurisdiction of the city of Columbus. To take a back step, I just wanted to explain that my home in Clintonville, the front yard from the front porch to the sidewalk is on a 60-degree incline, so something very much like this. That's too great of an incline to plant sod because it sloughs off during heavy rains down to the sidewalk and makes a mess, and it's a very expensive mess. I contacted the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they recommended that I try passion flower, which is a native Ohio plant that blooms continuously from June through October, is very beneficial to pollinators, but also is very deep-rooted and does an excellent job of holding the soil together and also functioning as a sponge, retaining water runoff. And back in 2022, I met with a group called Project Blueprint here in Columbus, which is trying to save the Clintonville sewer systems. And they were also trying to establish plants in yards that would retain water and reduce the runoff into the Clintonville sewers. And they were very happy with the work that I had done to plant the passion flower, which has done very well. In May of 2024, I attended an event sponsored by Project Green Spot of the city of Columbus, where they pointed out to me that my passion flower patch could be very easily made into a monarch garden, a project that Mayor Ginsburg has taken very heavily underhand under his Mayor's Monarch Pledge. They handed me a pamphlet explaining how to convert that to a monarch garden, which was simply the addition of common milkweed in addition to the passion flower to make it a monarch garden. I ordered the milkweed online, I planted it in July, and within 2 weeks, I had a notice taped to my front door from the Franklin County Code Enforcement notifying me that my front yard was now noxious weeds and rank foliage. After having one initial pre-trial meeting, I came here in September and spoke to the council, and that was when Chelsea issued that letter that I took with me to the hearing. I was also accompanied by a fellow named TJ, who is the general manager of Russell Tree Service. If anybody here has used Russell Tree Service, you probably have met TJ. He's also one of the few master arborists in central Ohio. And he came out to inspect my yard to make sure that there was no actual noxious weeds present in the yard. He's very familiar with the list of noxious weeds by the city and the state, which now matches completely. He accompanied me to the hearing, and after the hearing was over, I took down a transcript of what had taken place. And I'd like to just read that. It'll take just a few moments. So after arriving at the hearing, we were escorted into, TJ and I were escorted into a small meeting room just outside the courtroom. We met with a Mr. Clark, who identified him as Judge Mingo's court attorney. I asked Mr. Clark if he was the court prosecutor, and he said no. He said, I'm the attorney for Judge Mingo's court, not the prosecutor. Along with him was the code enforcement officer who declined to identify himself. He said Judge Mingo's court doesn't require the enforcement officers to provide their names. Mr. Clark allowed the code enforcement officer to make the initial statements, and he made 3 statements. The first was, a pollinator garden is just a homeowner who's too lazy to mow their lawn. The second statement was, Mr. Kiesel, if it makes you feel any better, I've never seen a pollinator garden yet that I didn't write a violation for. The third statement was, in August, referring to 2024, I went to an event at Whetstone Park that was sponsored by the City of Columbus. I spent the day there listening to their suggestions on how to plant pollinator gardens, bee gardens, butterfly gardens. They passed out seeds, and let me tell you something, every single thing they encourage people to do, I will write a violation for. At this point, Mr. Clark, I handed Mr. Clark the letter from Chelsea, and he read it and laughed. He said, "This letter is about species. We don't use species in Judge Mingo's court. Our code enforcement officers aren't trained in plant species." He looked over at the officer and said, "Do you know any plant species?" The officer shook his head and said, "I'm not a botanist." Mr. Clark said, "We don't know plants. Judge Mingo's court uses the international standard for code enforcement. That means there can be no restrictions on a code enforcement officer's ability to write a code violation." TJ then asked him, because TJ's business does landscaping work, he was very concerned about being there to hear what was the cause of this violation. TJ said, "Then I'd like to see your codes. I run a landscaping business and I need to be able to know what is allowed and what isn't." Mr. Clark responded, "We can't use codes. Codes would be a restriction on the code enforcement officer's ability to write a violation. Suppose there was a code that said you are allowed a certain plant as long as it's less than 20 inches tall, and the code enforcement officer came out, saw the plant, determined that it was wrong for the location, but it was only 15 inches tall. He wouldn't be able to write a violation, and that would be a violation of the international standard of code enforcement." TJ said, "Then how am I supposed to know what plants are allowed?" Mr. Clark said, "We're not botanists. We don't know plants." TJ said, "Well, then how do I know what's allowed?" And then the officer stepped in. "You're allowed grass. Grass is always okay. You're allowed 1 or 2 trees, depending on the size of your yard. You're allowed a few bushes, provided that they are neatly trimmed and maintained. And you're allowed a few flowers, provided they are evenly spaced and of a similar size and color. But if I come out there and you've got yellow flowers and they're this tall, and red flowers and they're this tall, and blue flowers and they're this tall, and they're all mixed together, well, that's a violation every single time because it's a disorganized mess. It's noxious weeds and rank foliage." I had a woman who told me one time that 1/3 of her garden blooms in the spring, 1/3 of her garden blooms in the summer, and the other third blooms in the fall. And I told her that means that at any given time, 2/3 of your garden is noxious weeds and rank foliage. I wrote a violation and I made her tear it all out. At this point, I passed Mr. Clark a copy of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. He read it and passed it to the officer, who laughed at it. Then I passed Mr. Clark a copy of the description of a monarch garden as written by the University of Kansas Department of Entomology, which sponsors the Mayor's Monarch Watch program. He read it and passed it to the officer. The officer read it, shook his head, and said, "Clear violation." Mr. Clark then said, "Mr. Kiesel, I'm here to explain to you that neither the mayor, nor the city council, nor the city of Columbus have any authority to authorize you or anyone else to plant a pollinator garden. There are only 2 people authorized to tell you what you can plant in your yard, and one of them is sitting right here," nodding to the officer. "The other is Judge Mingo. So if you want to go in front of Judge Mingo waving your Mayor's Monarch Pledge, that's fine, but let me explain to you what's going to happen. She's going to find you guilty, she's going to fine you, and she's going to order the city of Columbus to come out and remove those plants at your expense. Or you can tell the judge that you will remove them, and she will order this officer to come out in 30 days and make sure that it's been done, and then he will come out monthly to make sure that they never come back." TJ then asked, "I'm still not hearing what is allowed and what isn't. The city's codes for noxious weeds match the state's codes exactly. Why aren't you just using their list of noxious weeds?" Mr. Clark responded, "Because that would violate the international standard of code enforcement. I'm not trying to be hard on you, but you need to understand that neither the city of Columbus nor the state of Ohio have any business writing codes or authorizing plants without checking with Judge Mingo's court first to make sure that what they're recommending is legal. And at that point, I did have to take out the milkweed and the passion flower, which means that I'm now having erosion problems again on the front yard, which is not what Project Blueprint wants to hear. So the situation as we see it right now is Judge Mingo's court believes that they are the sole authority on what is allowed to be grown in people's yards, and none of the recommendations of the mayor's office, the City of Columbus, or the City Council have any value or can supersede their officers in any way, none of whom who have any training in biological sciences. One solution to this, I think, well, obviously there needs to be communication with Judge Mingo's court to clarify who really does have the authority in this particular matter. But also, we've got a lot of people that have similar training to myself that work in the City of Columbus Metro Park system. And I think it would be a very good idea to allow those individuals to play a role in registering people's pollinator gardens. They can come out, inspect the garden, make sure that it's compliant with what is needed for the pollinators, and then register it, put up a sign that says this is a registered pollinator garden, registry number such and such, and at that point, that garden should be hands off to Franklin County Code Enforcement. Thank you for hearing me.
Ken, thank you for being here and providing that testimony. I think it is an education for a lot of folks on the benefits of having pollinator gardens. It's why we're having this discussion. It's why we're having this conversation. And to your point, there was nothing actually outlining what it was. And so here is the opportunity for us to kind of provide some clarity. Yes, there will be additional conversations with the environmental court. Yes, there needs to be training with zoning officers so they know what is allowed and what is not allowed. But again, establishing a framework is what we're here to do today so that going forward, we can make better decisions and you don't end up in court having that back and forth conversation. So appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you. Now I'd like to hear from Tony Celebrezzi, Deputy Director of the Columbus Department of Building and Zoning. Tony, thank you for all the time you have put into learning about the importance of pollinator gardens, working with community members, and coming up with this draft language. I appreciate your willingness to work with council on issues of importance to the community, and I'm well aware of all the work that you and your team are doing on a regular basis. So we appreciate your support in working with us on this language. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Councilmember White and Councilmember Beatty. Thank you all for having this this hearing tonight, and thank you for bringing this subject to our attention. With me tonight is Kyle Kirker. He's one of our code enforcement officers. Helped me with some of the more technical things. Our code officers have to know multiple titles within the city code that they have to enforce. As I said before, my name is Tony Celebrezzi. I'm Deputy Director of Building and Zoning Services. Code enforcement is underneath our department, and this topic was brought to our attention by you and quite a few folks before that are behind us. I appreciated the informal hearing meeting we had a few weeks ago. It helped give myself and our team some information to go on. We move forward with meeting internally with a number of our code officers that have a passion for pollinator gardens also. They understand the importance of it. And so figuring out a way for us to allow these, but also balancing the interests of the rest of neighborhoods where people might not be as enlightened as the folks that are hosting these pollinator gardens. That's part of our task in life, to try to figure out how to balance all that. And I appreciate you circulating the draft language that we suggested. Also appreciated quite a few of the comments that came back to us, because they helped us make it a little bit better. With your indulgence, I want to read a little bit of it and talk about a couple of the changes that we made to the language. So we put this in chapter 709.03, which is noxious weed section. And I understand there's some interest in maybe putting it in another section that deals with solid waste, and obviously we're open to conversation with that. Basically, our mindset for this was to how do we create this in the simplest fashion by right so any homeowner can do this and be exempted from the noxious weed section. And so we ended up with 6 subsections under that exemption, including a buffer around the neighbor's property, trying to respect the property line there. In the second section, we added some language so it reads, consists of live or dormant native plants to Ohio that do not create a health hazard. Wanted to try to help, one of the big issues here were the dormant plants in the fall and the way they don't look as pretty as they do in the spring and summer. And so we want to make sure that we try to call that out in the language as some reason for us not to write a violation. Section C talked about the neighboring property, which we kind of covered in section 1, so we're going to suggest that we take that out. Section 4 does not violate code requirements for vision clearance from the zoning code. That's strictly a safety measure so that people that are pulling in and out of driveways or at corners and traffic is moving along, that they can still see from their car and make sure that it's a safe opportunity for them to pull out. Then does not contain any plants listed on the noxious or as noxious in this code. And I do know that in our code, but not in 709, we do reference the state of Ohio list of noxious plants and invasives, and we coordinate with them, except I think a while back, milkweed was still on that list, but we did take it out, and I believe back in September we recognized that was left in one section, and we removed that out initially, and so then the last section, section 6, does not occupy more than 50% of the front yard. Part of that that came about in our discussion again of trying to balance the neighborhood, the neighbors who may not, like I said, may not appreciate pollinator gardens as much. Code enforcement is strictly reactionary. So when someone makes a complaint to 311, that's when code enforcement goes out and inspects and tries to see whether is there a violation. If there's not, if there is, they do write a violation to give it to the tenant, landlord, owner, property management agency. We spread that love around a lot to make sure that everybody knows what our problem is. And then, as I discussed, we tend to enter into a negotiation period where we talk with them to figure out how do we get compliance from them. And so the thought here with 50% just in the front yard, rear yards, side yards can be 100% pollinator gardens under what we wrote here. That 50% again is trying to mitigate the number of complaints that we're going to get and have to go inspect, and then having to tell folks that complain that no, they're totally good. Now the 50% does not require somebody to put in turf grass. They can put in anything. Quite frankly, as Kyle and I were talking earlier today, they could make the whole yard pollinator, just put 50% of it below 12 inches. Now that does go against a lot of what we need with the stalks and the dormant and the hibernation over the winter. But the 50% was also, it's relatively easy for my code officers to look at it and go, yeah, it's roughly 50% of the yard. I didn't want to get too fancy with percentages, but again, I'm trying to mitigate the neighbors and their complaints to us in this situation. So I, again, appreciate you having this hearing, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you again for kind of outlining the current language that exists out there. The 50% was a question that we had, and I'm glad you're able to kind of clarify that. I don't know if that is something that needs to be clarified in code as well, but we can talk more about that because in my thinking, 50% has the height limit, but if I want to do clover for the remaining 50%, it's not going to reach that height, and thus would be compliant with what is being proposed.
Correct.
Currently, though, all of it is banned, right? Whether it be front yard, side yard, backyard, pollinators of 12 inches or higher are currently not allowed, right? And so this actually gives residents the ability to do things without those code violations. We had a meeting with Tony weeks ago, and he said at any given point, at any given house, there's probably 15 different violations that exist. And one of the ones we were talking about were side yards and what people were doing there. While we were having this discussion, I had some overwintered sunflowers that are, I don't know, 10 feet tall on the side of my yard. Clearly a code violation. I did take it down, so, don't have my neighbors come after me. But I do appreciate you kind of outlining what is there and why we're trying to provide some flexibility for code officers who are really kind of mitigating what could be neighbor disputes in this circumstance. So thank you. Councilmember, I don't know if you had any questions for Tony? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to call Kellen. Kellen, I'm not going to try to butcher your last name, so if you can just let us know your full name when you get to the podium. Kellen is another resident who was taken to court for her pollinator garden, and which helped to kind of organize this change in code.
All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Kellen Callinger-Yoke. There it is. And I'm a Columbus resident, and we're here today because, like Ken, who spoke before me, in the fall of 2024, I found a letter taped to my door from the city threatening to fine me up to $1,000 or imprison me for 6 months if I didn't cut down my garden. All because an angry neighbor didn't like my Ohio native wildflowers. At first, I thought there must be a mistake, as the violations notice cited me for noxious weeds and solid waste. I scoured my garden looking for noxious invasive species, but could find none, unless an errant dandelion or two were the issue. I looked for the trash that the code enforcement officers were referring to with solid waste, but I could find none. My garden, as always, was well maintained and clearly intentional. When I called the code violations office, I was yet again shocked. I was told that my native plants transition into noxious weeds when they begin to turn brown in the fall. When I said that just fundamentally doesn't make sense because that's not what weeds are, and that the preservation of natural areas was important for threatened organisms like fireflies, I was told that that doesn't matter anyway because any standing brown stem is considered solid waste. The next step was to appeal the violation to the City Violations Appeal Committee. I thought my appeal would be a sure thing, as the logical inconsistencies and objectively incorrect items in the code were inarguable and obvious. I was wrong. I was told outright by the committee that their job is not to make the law make sense, but rather to enforce it. They directed me to City Council as the group who was able to create just and reasonable laws. I've gathered letters from 16 Columbus residents, 8 of whom are biologists like me, a county governmental agency, 3 state and national conservation agencies, and a letter from a city council member from a community that has already amended their legislation to be native garden friendly. Their message is clear: change is wanted and needed. I also want to acknowledge the culture of fear being created by the obvious preference for conventional lawns that we just heard reflected in the 50% argument. A new neighbor recently moved across the street, and after seeing my garden, he told me he wanted to fill his property with native plants as well. Shortly after, he told me he wouldn't be doing this because he had heard about my story and doesn't want to risk dealing with the same threats. To be clear, my neighbor is choosing not to make a garden because he's too scared an anonymous person will use the government to attack him. I prove him right. So what are we asking for in this change to city law? We are simply asking to have the same protections as community members with conventional laws. Lawn owners are free to use 100% of their land for turf grass, no matter how unsightly I find it. Lawn owners are free to spray herbicides and pesticides on their grass that have been directly linked to cancer in the name of killing so-called weeds, even though I don't want poisons near my children. I'm not even asking for any of that to change. All I'm asking is to be able to plant native species that thrive in Ohio, support biodiversity, and do absolutely no harm to my neighbors without them being able to use the government to threaten me. We have provided the City Council with large amounts of feedback on what this means and numerous legislative examples that have passed in other cities, both large and small. The currently proposed legislation places arbitrary limitations on pollinator gardens because it aims to cater to turf grass owners. It shows preferential treatment to some Columbus residents and active antagonism to others. And further, the proposed legislation handles none of the issues associated with solid waste. I ask that City Council carefully consider the feedback we've provided in both previous meetings and in response to these new proposed changes. I thoroughly appreciate your time, and I am happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, do appreciate all the work that you've done to kind of help get us there. I mean, again, like I said, it is an education piece, and this is why we're here to, one, encourage folks to do this, right? If you're seeing it in your neighbor's lawn, hey, why not? And I think we have some photos of your garden, so we can kind of share that.
You might, yeah, I don't know. I sent some to you a while ago. Yep, that's what it looks like. Super unsightly. I don't know if you all can see it, but I can there. Just a real eyesore, I'll tell you what.
But I mean, clearly there is cues of care, right? There's clearly a path there. It seems like this is done by design.
There's signage, there's habitat. Yep.
There's a lot there. And so this is why we have to have this conversation to kind of establish the art of the possible.
It's also far more than 50% of my front yard. So with the current changes, I would be forced to destroy large portions of my garden, again, to cater to turf grass owners and their visual preferences.
Yeah. And I understand that. The challenge being any type of legislation is always going to be somewhat of a compromise. Even in my own home, there is a preference for turf grass. And I'm trying to get my wife to understand the importance of pollinators and to get her to move in that direction. She's not there yet. But it does start with this initial conversation to discuss what is possible in code, and hopefully to make this more normal than what we currently see, which I very much agree is not aesthetically pleasing to my eye. And so hopefully we can kind of figure out something in the middle that works for as many folks as possible. I'm going to be honest with you. You're probably not going to be 100% happy with what we land on because we have to balance the concerns of all residents of Columbus, and everyone is not there, sadly. I think there's more we can do on the education standpoint to kind of get folks to kind of change their mindset when it comes to lawns going forward. But that's a long path that we're going to have to walk to kind of get folks there. Because as a society, we have decided that turf grass is the preference. But again, something we should and want to push back on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just curious to know why the preference of some is more important than the preference of others.
I mean, if I had my way, it'd be different. And so that is the challenge when it comes to legislation. One side is probably not going to get 100% of what they want. We have to find some way to compromise. That's just how legislation works. There are 9 of us on this body. I think maybe 3 or 4 of us are gardeners. Everyone else, not so much. We all have differing opinion on what is aesthetically pleasing for everyone's yard. And so finding that balance so we can actually pass something and get something to start the conversation. This doesn't have to be the only time we look at this code. We can make changes based on what is actually happening on the ground. Let's say we pass this, zoning officers are going out. If they are challenged by what they're seeing, or if we're seeing no complaints at all, maybe we relook at that and change the kind of percentage. But it has to start somewhere, and this is kind of the initial effort to kind of get us down a path that's going to be a little bit more sustainable.
All right, well, I appreciate your time for both of you and everybody else here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jenny Pope, the Director of Community Outreach and Education with Franklin Park Conservatory. Jenny, thank you for being here.
I love how you keep talking about education. That's pretty awesome. And I'm going to be short and sweet. So, I welcome this opportunity to talk to you on behalf of Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. As an organization that envisions a world that celebrates nature as essential to the human experience, we strongly support the changes to the standards relative to noxious weeds. Technically, a weed is any plant that's growing in a place that you don't desire it to be in, right? The majority of native plants that are available to the public are desirable, perennials and annuals, and very few people would recognize them as weeds. Pollinator gardens can be beautiful, just as we've seen. Kellen's garden is gorgeous. If you visit the conservatory, we have gardens that you probably have no idea are native plant gardens. They're designed for pollinators and for the people. The Wells Barn wedding lawn is surrounded by native plants and is the gorgeous backdrop for many ceremonies. We have a pollinator garden on the community garden campus that delights our park goers every single day. And our entire children's garden is one big native pollinator garden that greets over 300,000 people each year. If the proposed changes allowing native plants is passed, the conservatory is committed to educating the public on the importance of incorporating native plants into the landscape and creating a beautiful front yard garden that not only benefits pollinators, but their neighborhood. Thank you for considering the changes that allow native plant gardens, pollinator gardens, and we appreciate all you're doing for the Columbus residents and, for making our place a greener environment. So thank you so much for everything you do.
Well, thank you for what you do as well and for being here and providing that testimony.
Yep.
Again, it is an education. And if folks have not been to the Franklin Park Conservatory, they should go. It is beautiful all the time. So
Well,
thank you.
All right, we'll do our best.
Next, we have Laura Fay, Friends of the Lower Olentangy Watershed. Flo. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here and for your advocacy.
Councilmember Weish, Councilmember Beatty, thanks for hosting this. And my name is Laura Fay. I'm the chair of the FLOW, Friends of the Lower Olentangy Watershed Science Committee. And we did a green space plan for our watershed, which includes way more than Columbus, includes 27 different municipalities. And we contracted with Franklin Soil and Water to help us pull all their GIS data in to see where our high quality spaces could be and where our protected lands were. We only have like 8.8% protected lands, which I thought was pretty good, a lot of parks along, but some of those protected spaces then are turf grass for kids to play on, roads, parking lots. So we think we need to do more, but the thing we learned most was 38% of our watershed is turf grass. Turf grass is not native, it has shallow roots, and that's bad. We need our watersheds to act like Mother Nature made them, infiltrate the water, move down through the soil, and slowly move to the river, getting cleaner and colder. If you would try and kayak the Olentangy in the summer, we don't get enough water. Part of it is because of Delaware Dam, but we need that water to come out, and that's what supports native mussels and some of the beautiful darter fish that we have. And we need everyone to help with that. So 38% is too high for good water quality. We're trying to encourage people to reduce their turf grass. And so we have had a backyard conservation program since 2006. Another thing about pollinator plants, besides those deep roots, is you don't mow. Maybe you could mow every other year or, to simulate a prairie burn. But that saves you on mowing, which saves you on CO2 emissions and helps us get to our carbon neutral goal. So we see it for water quality and air quality. And now I have some feedback from John Brett, who is a Columbus resident, a FLOW board member, and an employee of Coldwater Consulting. And it says, FLOW believes the best strategy in this case is a less is more approach. The more edits and additions we propose, the more difficult adherence and enforcement will be. FLOW thinks stressing the latter to the city is important. Flow edits focus on allowing pollinator gardens to be categorized the same as agriculture and horticulture, which is a right we all have as homeowners already. And writing the code to apply to all these land uses in a way that satisfies the city's responsibility to public health. So we don't necessarily think it should be about aesthetics. We think it should be about public health, and we're not encouraging anything that draws rats, that kind of thing. We think some language is too specific, arbitrary, and redundant. And the new section is meant to provide exceptions to the definitions of hazardous and noxious weeds outlined in the existing code section ABCD. And re-prohibiting them in this section creates confusing logic. The 50% is an arbitrary percentage for the non-3-foot pollinator garden. At first, we freaked out and thought that meant 50% had to be turf grass. And when we see some people's lawns that are acres, 50% could be a lot. But Tony explained to me that it was just had to be below 12 inches. There could be some sedges and things like that, stone crops. And then we also request the term shrubs be removed from sections A and B to provide clarity, because I think we all have shrubs in our front yard, and the law currently prohibits those. The code currently prohibits those. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't think we have any questions at this point in time, and I think we have kind of the written remarks as well for potential changes. So we'll take that in consideration as we look at the revised draft of what it looks like.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to working with you.
All right. Thank you for being here. And my apologies, I did skip over someone. I want to invite Craig Toothman, the Executive Director of Franklin County Pollinator Pathways, to the podium to provide some remarks. Craig, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I didn't feel slighted, by the way. I was comfy back there. As you had that nice introduction, I'm Craig Toothman, Columbus resident, founder and current president of Franklin County Pollinator Pathway, whose mission is to create and restore connected corridors of native plant habitat for pollinators throughout all of Franklin County. Since Columbus is the main municipality there, what happens here has impacts throughout the rest of the county. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you today on behalf of Franklin County Pollinator Pathway, and also in representation of myself as a Columbus resident. I want to take a moment and express our appreciation to you, Councilmember Weish, and your staff, certainly to Deputy Director Celebrezzi and his staff. We really appreciate you taking the time and effort that's required to explore these important issues. As all of you are aware, the issue being discussed here relates to the establishment, management, and maintenance of naturalized landscaping areas on properties throughout the city of Columbus. These naturalized landscapes represent a new style of intentional property landscaping. These areas typically involve the use of native plants as opposed to more traditional non-native ornamentals, and oftentimes replace areas of property previously committed to non-native turf grass, which is, as Laura so eloquently said, is really a problem. Native plants have significant advantages over their non-native counterparts, not only in the provision of critically needed habitat for our native pollinators and other wildlife, but also in attributes such as drought tolerance, reduced summer watering needs, reduce surface stormwater runoff problems and water quality issues, and allow for profound reductions in the amounts of chemical inputs that are necessary for the success of non-native plants in our region. The use of this newer style of naturalized landscaping is also very supportive to a broad group of other important local goals and initiatives, including the City of Columbus Climate Action Plan, the Urban Forestry Master Plan, the Urban Heat Island issue, along with many others. One of the fundamental challenges associated with this style of landscaping is that these areas can look quite different from what we've all come to associate with a well-managed well-cared-for property. The look of expansive green lawns without any signs of broadleaf weeds, well-designed tree and shrub plantings, and extensive signs of both intentional management and maintenance have been ingrained in our minds for decades as signs of responsible property ownership. Most of us have been brought up assuming without a second thought about the desirability of introducing pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and fertilizers to our property. Removing plant seed heads and stems, gathering up all our fallen leaves, and essentially cleaning up and controlling our properties to the point that other life forms that we as humans actually depend on cannot survive on our properties. Naturalized landscaping affords us an opportunity to begin to address some of these ecological challenges. Concerns about this newer landscaping style, if you will, are based upon differences of cultural interpretation. It's not science, it's culture. This issue is not really about the plants, the design, or the biodiversity and natural benefits involved. This is a visual communications issue. It's a social expectations issue. It's about how these landscapes look and the meanings and values that are conveyed to the wider community by those appearances. The city code standards that are most relevant to this discussion are standards 70703, solid waste, 70903, noxious weeds, 71303, rodents, insects, vermin, and other pests, 332105, vision clearances, and finally 4501.377, again dealing with some specifics regarding solid waste. The proposed draft language recently circulated only speaks quite briefly to standard 70903, noxious weeds. We would encourage the city to review these other relevant standards as well, which represents a much broader challenge than expressed by this initial draft, and one that will require additional input to address properly. We take the city at its stated word, meaning that this is but the beginning of a careful, transparent, public-supported process, and we urge you to step back decisively from any self-imposed deadlines. We wish to clearly state our support for the underlying concepts and purposes of these various code standards, being associated with public safety, public health, preservation of property values, and a sense of community pride. Each of us as residents and citizens welcomes the efforts of our government to codify these important subjects on our behalf. We also recognize and appreciate the needs of the city to be able to respond promptly, effectively, and most importantly, consistently to any citizen complaints. As such, we fully support the need for any new code standards to be flexible, adaptable, and as simple as possible. Complicated terminology, limitation based on percentages of land use, etc., will only further exacerbate the confusion and the problem. Many people have expressed a strong desire to provide you with detailed suggestions here today, particularly as they relate to deep concerns with the initial draft document recently provided to the public. We feel, however, that the large quantity of pertinent information that was gathered and provided to this process in early March is not reflected in this initial draft at all. And we are somewhat confused as to the direction and intent of the city. We would ask, what additional information can be provided for consideration that would be helpful and positive to this valuable process? We look forward to working closely with you and feel that the City of Columbus and the local conservation community can work together, striving to craft code standards that serve all Columbus residents and businesses in an equitable and sustainable manner. On behalf of Franklin County Pollinator Pathway and myself, I thank you all for your time. I'd be glad to try and answer a question if you have any.
Thank you, Craig.
You're
No,
very
no
welcome.
question, just really a comment. Again, reiterating wanting to have more engagement or in the legislative process so we can come to a policy decision that works, that is actually beneficial. And so providing that testimony, we also receive, I want to say, 12 additional written testimonies from others who also propose different changes that they'd like to see in the legislation. I think we'll take the time to kind of summarize across those documents to see where the biggest changes could be made. We will again meet with folks to kind of talk through, hey, this is what's being proposed, this is why we're going this direction. To your point, there is no deadline. You know, ideally, we want to have this done for this time of the year, right, where folks are doing their gardens, they're planning for the future. But to your point, getting to good policy is goal number one. So the timing is really how long it takes for us to get there.
Wonderful.
So,
I will share, just as an off-the-cuff remark, that many people expressed to me personally their concerns with the concept of appeasing certain groups of citizens at the expense, potentially, of other groups of citizens. Right now, a resident without a permit, a design, registration, plan, anything, can go to Lowe's or anywhere else, buy non-native plants, buy non-native grass seed, do whatever the heck they want to in their front yard, and nobody bats an eye. Many people that are embracing this much more ecologically sound and beneficial style of landscaping wonder why we can't have those same rights and privileges as other citizens. We're not looking for more, but how can you provide opportunities for one group of citizens at the expense of another group of citizens? That doesn't seem appropriate for a successful code review.
no, I
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
that. I mean, look, it requires elected officials willing to kind of push the envelope of what the art of the possible is. I mean, we were excited to come in 24 with the stated goal of making Columbus the greenest city in the country. And I mean all shades of green. And in that space is also how we encourage the protection of our pollinators and get folks to rethink what culturally has been pushed on them for generations in terms of what a well-manicured lawn looks like. The reality is we are killing our pollinators and ultimately going to harm ourselves and our food production if we continue down this path. But we have to start somewhere, right? We have to make the case of why this is important, codifying the ability for residents to do this with the hope that we can start to change the minds of those around us, immediately our neighbors, to get more folks to go down this path. I hear you, I do. But the realities of legislation mean I gotta get everyone to agree. And sadly, we have not had that mind shift with everyone. And so we gotta start somewhere to kind of get down the path that's gonna be more sustainable, as I stated before. But your continued engagement and advocacy is one of the ways in which we can make this the best policy possible. Because I know, to your point, other cities will see what we have done and said, we're just going to take this and change a couple words and replicate it here too. So it's not lost on me on how important it is to get something that is really good legislatively. We want to take as big a bite of an apple as we can while we have city departments that want to work with us here. But the realities of putting together legislation is real. And so balancing that is the challenge we have as elected officials, and we will do our best to get the best possible policy.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Londell Towns.
Member White, before you call the next witness, can I ask the director?
Sure, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
One question.
One second.
And this is just for my own education here. How would legislation like this interplay with residents that are subject to a homeowner's association agreement? How does code enforcement even work with those? And this is just for background, not specific to this legislation, but.
So with regards to homeowners association, we do not enforce any of their rules, we just enforce what's in city code. The homeowners association can't allow something that's more, that violates the city code, but they can require other additional things as per the homeowners agreement. So they can't, like I said, they can't allow something that city code prohibits, even if it's in the agreements and so forth. So,
But in an instance like this, a homeowners association could prohibit on their own pollinator gardens, for instance.
correct. A homeowners association could require all turf grass or other certain amenities with regards to what's planted there. That would be their
Thank you.
choice through their process.
And that's more of just a point of clarification that I wanted to understand. Thank you.
No worries. Floor is yours, sir. My apologies.
Greetings, Council, Beatty, White, amazing staff, Deputy Director, and all you amazing pollinators and future thinkers. My name is Dr. Londale Towns Sr. I am the CEO and founder of Life Savers, that's life with a Y. We stand as champions for sustainability in a different couple capacities, Congressman, soon to be. I'm speaking it, sir. So it seems as if we're having a conversation of perceived beauty and proven benefits. Council Member White, I stand as a biologist and also as a minister. Right, so I have two different hats of stewardship that I must commend and stand in agreement with. When I say perceived beauty, we're looking at this monoculture type of living versus this pollination gardens. I think we have to take a step back and call this what it really is, which is a moral concern. And I say that as a champion for sustainability because we have these called food deserts in our great states, here in our great city, but then again, we turn around and we kill the thing that provides the most food. Call it monoculture. Here we have 350 community gardens, and after visiting 99% of them, what we found out is only 45% of them are growing functional food that we can consume for nutrients. I thank you, doctor, because this is a public health concern. I don't know if we could code this thing out or iron this out with legislation. I think we must rely on the experts. Right? I think when we talk to people like Mr. Ken, who's devoted thousands and thousands of hours into this field and years into finding the right ingredients to nurture the most beautiful plants he could find that could provide the most impact in draining the water from his land. I say that's a huge public issue. As a biologist, I stood back and we found a cute way, Brother White, to add that style, as my brother kept saying, to these amazing pollination gardens like Sister Kellen's. Picture this here. We take kindergarten through fifth graders. We have this program called MAP, M-A-P therapy, where we take music, art, and play. Well, in this place, we're going to take art, Beatty, and in this space, we're going to take Helen's and Kellen's garden, and we're going to add these things called gratitude stones. Wow. See, gratitude stones not only are something give the students a beautiful art project, but adds that beauty and that eye candy and that aesthetically pleasing infrastructure to a Kellen's garden. Imagine these big, beautiful stones colored with grace and hope and gratitude and words that when you walk through them, they will inspire you to keep
these gardens, rather demolish these gardens. I then again saying we stand side to side with agencies like Franklin Park Conservatory, right? I think that would be a beautiful housing agency for grants to fund and support these beautiful gardens like Kellen's Garden. So now when community have these pop-up shops, we can have informational sessions. So now the community can come in and be educated, as you kept saying over and over, Councilman. So now we're not having a clash of the titans, but we're having a delegation of grace and sharing of space to where now these gardens are not being attacked, but they're being utilized as congregate spaces for natural resources and natural species. And what about our most vulnerable population, our kids? Kids when books, reading inside Kellen's Garden would be a beautiful testament. I think giving these kids something to do now versus stealing cars later would be very beneficial. So I digress on fashion, I digress on style. We want to be the ones as lifesavers to add that little bit of extra to all of these pollination gardens and make them extraordinary. And if you are confident in some of the work we've done, we ask you to please go out to Jefferson Elementary in Gahanna, Ohio. They're welcome to this. We made beautiful progress out there. And then going down to Reynoldsburg, where we made beautiful progress with them to where these gardens are now beautiful youth congregate spaces where they can have a book on a bench. So Columbus, I bring you a gift from Russell Stover's. But I tell you, you must find the link between Russell Stover's and Pollination Gardens, and these are yours. Thank you. Any questions? And I can't get the answer to that.
Well, Dr. Towns, thank you for taking us to church. And yes, to your point, engaging kids in the process is important to the sustainability of our city. It's one of the reasons I have that garden in my backyard. My kids come out there to plant the seeds so that as they have grown up, no vegetable is weird to them. Because again, these are the plants that you grew in your own backyard, and so they're more apt to try them. The relation to our health and how we have made rules in our society is constantly in conflict, and this is one of those examples. So I appreciate you being here to provide support and testimony for going down this path. Yes, there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of educating people to kind of get everyone into shifting their mindset. But, you know, it takes resident support to kind of get there. Thank you.
And by you saying work, I'm assuming you meaning looking at it creatively, approaching it with curiosity, not with the intellectual arrogance that we have the answer already, right? That we have the answer being turf, or we have the answer being 50-50. I think if we approach with that curiosity like a child, I think we will have a lot more room and space for agency and collaboration than one side getting something and the other side getting the minus. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I think the last speaker we have signed up so far is Alexis Nicole Nelson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for your time, Councilman Weiss and Councilman Beatty. My name is Alexis Nicole Nelson. I am an environmental educator, a climate activist, a begrudging social media personality. And this not only is extraordinarily important to me from a more holistic, larger top-down view of what our city could be moving forward, it is also very personal to me because, like a few others who have spoken before me, I don't know what was going on in the water last fall, but I too was hit with a code violation. So I live in Franklinton, not usually the neighborhood that comes to mind when someone says that they are working on building out a pollinator space. That being said, we are likely one of the neighborhoods who needs it the most. I know that you guys have all looked at the Heat Island maps everyone did working towards the tree canopy plan that you guys pioneered over the last few years. But Franklinton on average in the middle of the summertime is between 10 and 15 degrees hotter than our neighbors in Clintonville, or even our close by neighbors just on the other side of the river in Grandview or Upper Arlington. And on top of also very much suffering when it comes to heat, we are also often on the front lines when it comes to water, as we all just got to witness live and in person 3 weeks ago, when the rivers flooded, because after a year of drought, there was simply not a chance for the trees, and much of which is turf grass also in a lot of our open spaces, to get to take in any of that moisture. And when that happens, my neighborhood floods. Another thing that makes us a little bit different is our house plots tend to be a little bit smaller than some of our other Columbus neighbors. And while I so appreciate the fact that we're even here discussing this right now, to me it's very exciting to know that this is something that matters enough to the council to take seriously enough to put legislation down about pollinator gardens. If I, on my plot, was putting a 30-inch margin around all sides, that eliminates a huge amount of surface area on a plot as small as mine. It's amazing that some neighbors with bigger yards are able to do that, able to maintain that space between them and their next door neighbors and still feel like they are making a contribution to the local flora. But for a lot of us in our neighborhood, that's simply not the case. Same goes with the 50% rule. And once again, I know and acknowledge that this is a jumping off point. And a jumping off point moving in a very positive direction. But if our yard was suddenly only 50% native pollinators, we wouldn't be doing a whole lot of good work. Now, I was so excited upon buying my first house with my fiance to be able to garden for the first time since I was a kid, growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I tried to follow all of the rules to the best of my abilities. I made sure that I got species that would not become too tall or too unruly, and species that were beautiful, that would flower so that my neighbors wouldn't be bothered with them. And I still got hit with that same code violation. And so I would implore the council to continue the conversation, just like you're doing right now with members of our community, because while I think that this is an excellent start, I definitely think that there's a lot more wiggle room for some of the nuance of your neighbors like me. Additionally, I agree with Kellen. It is very interesting that we are the ones who are having to jump through so many hoops, and I understand that when culturally you are the new kid on the block, that often comes with the territory. But if my neighbor 2 doors down with the 40-foot tree of heaven that sends root shoots out, a block in either direction, doesn't have to answer to anybody because of that. The fact that my golden Alexanders just barely crossed over the 12-inch mark, warranting a $1,000 fine, is a little bit confusing to me. I would also like to advocate for, and I know that this is the biggest stretch, pokeweed possibly not being on the noxious plant list. I'm honestly surprised anybody is even backing that up. Thank you so much.
Oh no, this is a well-informed audience on pollinator gardens. I'm not surprised at all.
In addition to providing an important food source, both for the giant leopard moth, one of our nearly endangered Lepidoptera species, and also the ruby-throated hummingbird, which delights gardeners all spring, summer, and fall here in Ohio. It is honestly a beautiful plant that I feel like has become unfairly maligned. And with half of my family hailing from the South, it is also a really important part of my food culture. So that's my one little personal flag that I would like to wave on the play. I would also love to ask, and you don't have to answer right here, right now, if there is anyone on the council who you feel like is maybe on the fence or even fully on the opposite side of the fence as a lot of us who've spoken today, because I would love the opportunity to get to speak with them. And I would be very happy to also engage my followers here in the greater Columbus area to be able to give more firsthand experiences than we possibly can in this one meeting. Yeah, any questions? I've never done this before.
Well, you did an amazing job. So
Thank you.
on your first time doing this. I will always say, if you have other folks who want to provide input, send them our way. I'm not one who shies away from people being angry at the podium. I honestly think it helps to strengthen the policy that we have, and it also shows how important this issue is for our residents. I sometimes get the bad rap of like the crazy sustainability guy running around the hallways about, think about the future, think about the future. But I can only do that if I have people behind me telling me, we need you to fight for this issue. So any additional support or any additional voices you can bring to the conversation, we want to hear them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. So before we close out, I do want to just open up the floor. If there's anyone else who did not get, if you want to come back up, sure. Sure, can you come to the mic?
And again, thank you for this opportunity to speak here. Also, to jump on the back of what was just said about pokeberry, yes, pokeberry does need to be taken off the list of noxious weeds. In recent years, it's been discovered that it's a primary protein source of migrating cardinals in the fall, and one of the reasons for the crash in cardinal populations, being our state bird, is the lack of pokeweed stands because of the draining of marshland. So it is extremely important that we get pokeweed off the list of noxious weeds if we want to preserve our cardinal population. But in addition to that, if I may ask, Mr. Sullivan, what is the relation? Oh, okay. I'm sorry if I'm talking with my back. What is the relationship between the City of Columbus code enforcement and the Franklin County code enforcement? And is it possible that all the good work that we're attempting to do with these changes in code could simply be ignored by Franklin County code enforcement or overruled?
So thank you for the question. Franklin County is a separate political entity that the City of Columbus is within. However, their code enforcement does not extend within the boundaries of the City of Columbus. The City of Columbus code enforcement officers cover those and apply the city's code to that. Now, we have many challenges whereby we have lots of townships that are completely encompassed within the City of Columbus, all the way down to single parcels that are still township. And many times the county code enforcement is their code enforcement for those townships. So if you want afterwards, I'm more than happy to take your address and I can go do some research tomorrow and reach out to you to let you know, because some of the things you were saying is not what I have experienced with my code officers. Doesn't mean someone may not have gone off the reservation there at the environmental court, but at the same time, that's way we can all have the facts so we know exactly what happened to you, and we can figure out, we can move from there.
Thank you. I'll meet with you.
Great.
Thank you, Deputy Director. Is there anyone else who'd like to provide? I got you right after that, Ryan, okay? And I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself and spell your name for the record?
Of course. Thank you, Councilman. My name is Jeffrey Parker. That's spelled Geoffrey Parker. And I'm an attorney and a homeowner in Franklinton. I apologize for the mask. I've got a cold right now, and I'm trying to be polite to everybody. But I just want to come up here really quickly and make the argument that everybody else here seems to be allergic to, which is that this is an individual liberty issue. This isn't just an issue about conservation, although it happens that our interests are aligned in this case, but fundamentally, the government doesn't need a reason to let me do something on my land. It needs a reason to tell me not to do something on my land. And there, as everybody here seems to agree, there are no good reasons not to allow pollinator gardens. The only reason that we've been given, the thing that sticks in my mind is the 50% limit. The reason that we were given for the 50% limit for front yards is that code enforcement wants to be able to, when they get complaints about these gardens, actually act on some of those complaints. In other words, code enforcement basically just doesn't want to have to tell busybodies no. And that's not a good enough reason to restrict what I can do on my land, when put up against, especially when put up against all of the very good reasons that a pollinator garden is a good idea. Somebody here is going to feel the wrath of these busybodies one way or the other, and I would submit that it is better for the wrath to be felt by code enforcement in the form of long phone calls than for it to be felt by people trying to do a good thing in the form of $1,000 fines. So I think the 50% limit is arbitrary and hard to justify, and it's also just, it doesn't make sense as a policy matter. I think it should at the very least be higher, maybe 2/3, something along those lines. And I also just want to point out that code enforcement has access to the argument. It's an individual liberty thing when they respond to these busybodies. And I would recommend that code enforcement and everybody else here get more comfortable saying this is an individual liberty issue, because that will carry along people that the conservation thing won't. I welcome your questions.
I appreciate you being here and providing that advocacy. Deputy Director, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that is additional feedback we'll take into consideration.
Thank you.
So thank you. And then Ryan?
Good afternoon. Ryan Foshee, F-O-S-H-E-E. Among other things, I'm the co-chair of the Clintonville Green Team, part of the Clintonville Area Commission. I just wanted to add on one last thing. I applaud this effort, sincerely. This will protect a lot of people who want to grow pollinator gardens, especially beginners. That's great, because a lot of people, like the story we heard from Kellen, want to get started. It's really discouraging to hear that they didn't because of fear of a ticket. But if we could do something to protect the leaders in this space as well, some kind of additional exemption, some of the most incredible gardens in our town would remain ticketable offenses. And I just wanted to speak up on behalf of those folks, because those leaders are the ones that inspire other people to do this work, and we shouldn't leave them behind. Whether that's some kind of license to just get around the whole thing and just create the most beautiful yards in the city, or whatever it may be. It's great to protect, and really I'm thinking about the 50% rule and then those setbacks. These were all valid arguments that we heard, and you'll hear a lot of passionate folks because they're very passionate about what they love. Let's do something somehow to protect those folks. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your continued advocacy and the work that you're doing in the community to kind of encourage folks to go down a more sustainable path. Is there anyone else in the room who hasn't had a chance to testify if they wanted to? All right, seeing no takers. We did receive written testimony as well. That is also on my council webpage, so you can kind of check out the testimony we received both on utility reselling, but also pollinator gardens. There was actually a lot of feedback and a lot of technical suggestions that folks sent forward, which we love, because those are things that we can kind of work with the department to kind of find a reasonable compromise that works for everyone. And I have to keep reiterating compromise, everybody. I have to say that because that is what policy making is about. I will say, if anyone did not get a chance to, anyone watching did not get a chance to provide testimony or ask questions, they can reach out to my staff, Chelsea Gulterman at CLGOLTERMAN@columbus.gov. We'll take as much feedback as we can. Again, more voices just help to make the policy better. I want to thank you all again for joining us this evening. My team and the appropriate departments will discuss the feedback we heard today and possible amendments to the proposed code language. And my office will be in touch if we have any follow-up questions for those that testified. This committee will reconvene on May 21st at 3:30, so mark your calendars. It will likely be at an outside location, which will be announced a little closer to the date. I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you.